Hey everyone, it's Kate, and I'm kicking off our 5-year anniversary by interviewing Jenny Rushmore from Cashmerette Patterns. I apologize, I can hear myself a little bit late, so it's a little hard to talk, but I'll get used to it. I'll be jumping on Facebook Live 4 times this week, and every time you like or comment on one of the videos, you can be entered to win a raffle prize. So be sure to like and comment. And at the end of this video, I'll talk more about the rest of this week's videos. So welcome, Jenny. I have been a fan of yours for a long time, since Cashmerette was just your sewing blog.
Yeah.
And now you own a independent, innovative pattern company that has different front pieces for C through H cups. You have a pear-shaped jeans pattern, an apple-shaped jeans pattern, and all of your patterns are modern and elegant and look great on everyone. You also have great educational videos. Your mission is well aligned with the Confident Stitch mission of uplifting and empowering people through sewing. Making alterations is the part of garment sewing that takes the longest, and you do it for us. One of the rules of marketing is to find your customers' pain points and offering them a solution, and you do exactly that with your patterns. I've always been a sewer, but like you, I fell in love with it when I realized that I could alter patterns to make them fit. And also that there's no shame in having to alter the pattern. I mean, everybody has to do it. And I love your philosophy of changing the pattern and not yourself. Mm-hmm. So tell me how sewing clothes for yourself has been a life-altering experience for you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Kate. It's exciting to chat. And it's funny that we both discovered that we started our businesses 5 years ago, because we're in exactly the same situation. We're like 5 years and 2 weeks old or something like that. So, I mean, obviously in a very direct way, Cashmerette changed my life, because I used to have a corporate marketing career and now I run a sewing pattern company, which if you told me age 29 I'd be doing, I would have told you it was literally impossible, because I'd never sewn anything in my life at that point. But yeah, as you alluded to, for me, the process of sort of learning to sew has been like, you know, a hugely life-changing one. I kind of started partly because I just wanted a hobby, you know, and I like doing creative things. So I thought, you know, give this a go. And immediately I sort of suddenly realized, like, goodness me, there's the potential here that I could actually make clothes that fit me and I like. And there's sort of two sides to that, because on the one hand, I found it really hard to find clothes to fit me. Not just because of my size. At the time I was, I don't know, a US 12, 14, something like that. Now I'm more like a 16, 18, but also I have H-cup boobs. So even if a store carried my size theoretically, they almost never covered my boobs. So basically I had to just wear knits or wrap things, and that was about it. And so first of all, like, most clothes didn't fit me. And then even when I could find ones that fit me, for the most part, they were terrible, right? Like absolutely terrible. For some reason, ready to wear, instead of just taking the clothes for thin people and making them bigger, they decide that, you know, when you pass a 16, you magically become a different human being who wants to wear like polyester and frills and have your shoulders out for some reason that I don't understand. So it was sort of this double whammy, like things didn't fit me, and even when they did, they were far from my style or allowing me to express myself. So learning to sew, I suddenly was like, oh my goodness, like, I immediately realized that I could make clothes I liked out of fabric I liked, and that was, you know, a bit of a mind blow. And then the fitting side. Now, the challenge for me is that when I started, there were very few sewing patterns that went into plus sizes, and there were certainly none that catered for an H-cup bust. So that's where, you know, to the point you were just making about pattern alteration, that's where I then had to deep dive. And I think it's probably true to say that a lot of plus size people have to become expert really, really fast in a way that if you're smaller, you don't always have to, because you have to learn how to do all these like grading between sizes, how to do a full bust adjustment, how to grade patterns up to a size that you might be. But once I'd mastered that, it was, you know, total liberation. As I say, like to some of my students, like I don't try on clothes in stores that don't fit me anymore. And that is surely one of the like lows of being a person, right? Is like reaching to the back of the rack and trying it on and then getting stuck. And it feels like a test that you failed, right? It's like, you're meant to be able to fit this. You can't. But now every single item of clothing I ever make fits me. And that's amazing in terms of like your confidence, in terms of how you sort of view yourself. So yes, there's that. Plus, you know, now this is my job. So all in all, life altering.
Yeah. So take us through the timeline. You were living in Boston, you needed a hobby to relax, and you took a sewing lesson, and then what happened?
Yeah, so I learned to sew in about 2010 when I was 30, actually coming off a breakup where, you know, you like sit around and you can't think of anything other than this like wretched man, and then you're like, oh, what shall I do? And I was like, okay, I'll do a sewing lesson and distract myself. And I'll be honest, it wasn't a very good one. It was very poor. The woman didn't know much. But to be perfectly honest, you know, I was in front of a sewing machine. I showed me how a seam worked. And it was like, oh, that's amazing. And then I got very, very obsessive about it. I spent a lot of free time. I started spending all my weekends working on it, reading every blog. Because at the time,
it was
blogs were huge at the time in a way that they're not so much now. And mostly taught myself. I did take a couple of classes when I was a bit more advanced at Gather Here, which was a really well-known store in Cambridge near Boston. But for the most part, honestly, like I taught myself, and it was trial and error, learning how to do an FBA, doing 500 of them. And eventually, you know, I came across like a couple of patterns that worked more for me. So I kind of made those again and again. So, you know, I started blogging too, almost immediately when I started sewing. I just, you know, especially because I'm an expat usually anyway. So I live thousands of miles away from a lot of my friends and family. I started it as a way of kind of connecting with people. And then what happened around 2013, 14 is that there were increasing numbers of plus size bloggers. We still represented a tiny percent of the total community, but there were a few of us. And there was so much blog, you know, there were blog tours going on, and there were like competitions and things like that. And I am friends with Mary Danielson Perry, who runs the blog Idle Fancy. And we were chatting about how you never saw any bigger women in the blog tours, and you never saw any bigger women in the competitions, or, you know, being promoted on the front page of birdistyle.com and, you know, Pattern Review and places like that. And we were discussing, and we were saying, well, given statistically the average American woman is plus size, and the majority of women are plus size, like there's just no place for us to go to learn the information we need to learn, like what patterns come in our size, and how do you make the adjustments that you need to, and how you do a full bust adjustment.
Right.
And we were like, we should do something about this. So it actually began with me contacting Collect Patterns, because they just extended into plus sizes at the time. And I said, let's do a blog tour of the Minetta. It went super well. They told me that it helped, like it really helped sales. And so then we were like, maybe this should be more. And that's when we started the Curvy Sewing Collective, which is still like the biggest like plus size and curvy website online. And immediately that did super well. I think we had something like 10,000 people visit the website on its first day, which sort of tells us something, because, you know, we didn't have any Google SEO or anything. And for me, it sort of confirmed something that had been percolating in my head for quite a while, which is there is a huge, huge audience of sewing people whose basic needs are not being met, as in they're not getting patterns in their size. It was immediately obvious, like everyone was saying the same thing. And that was really sort of the nugget for deciding I would start Cashmerette.
Yeah, well, I love your smackdowns in the Curvy Sewing Collective. Those are always my favorite blog posts. So my next question was about classes, and it sounds like you have really taught yourself reading and implying things that you learn in books. What have been the best books for you?
I mean, I'd say that I mostly learned online from blogs, and also from like sewing patterns that are good at teaching. So for instance, at the time, Colette were really known, like they're now Seamwork, sort of, not quite sure what the status of that is, but Colette / Seamwork were really known for like patterns that teach. I didn't actually go to a Big Four pattern for years and years and years. And even then it was very confusing. So I was really into indie patterns immediately. And a lot of those pattern companies had sew-alongs or had little videos, but more commonly like photographic sew-alongs. And then, there's also forums where you could post and like get advice. So for instance, like the patternreview.com forums are really, really popular. So I think I mostly learned through those kind of forums. I did buy a few books. The one I referred to the most is Fit for Real People, the
Palmer Pledge
from Patty Palmer and Maria Alto.
Yes.
I think, that there are some things, and this is sort of funny, this is what sort of comes back to Cashmerette. A lot of mainstream sewing materials are not very body positive. And they make comments about plus sizes that I think other people just might not pick up on. But there's an awful lot of like, to look thinner, do this, or like, don't wear these colors, or, someone made an Instagram about it the other day. It was quite funny. But like, there's a lot of sort of like, if you don't have the ideal body, and I think now in like modern sort of body positive, fat positive movements, we really reject the idea that there's an ideal body. I mean, what does that even mean, right? So I didn't love, always what I was reading, because it didn't quite strike the chord of like where I was in my life, but there was sort of like the basic information I needed. The other thing that I use, which I found really great, and I actually now have a class on it, is Craftsy, which if you haven't heard, like it's back to being Craftsy, like someone.
I know, I'm so excited.
So closing the circle, right? I now have a class on it of my own on full bust adjustments, but I took Susan Calgi's couture dress. I think it's couture something, couture techniques.
Right.
When actually I had not been sewing for very long, and I made the Colette Hazel, which was the sundress that has the like triangle here.
Yeah, I remember.
It was like amazing. It was like by far the best thing I'd ever made at the time, because I literally like underlined really cheap gingham. Like I used all of these techniques on something that I'm sure Susan Calgi would never make. But that was really amazing too. And that really sort of advanced my skills. And I really recommend Craftsy now. I mean, they're doing tons of deals where you can get a year, I don't know, threepence. But they have so many really high-end teachers who, if you're actually to see them for a weekend, you're going to be spending like $1,000, or you can watch them on Craftsy and you can keep on rewatching. So I think now, like a lot for me and for a lot of my students, is moving away from books and more towards those kind of materials.
Yeah. I have gone to Portland, Oregon and taken a lot of classes with Marta Alto and Patty Palmer. And although they do talk about here's how you look slimmer, I feel like they do a lot of good body positive talk. They talk a lot about fluff. You have a little, let's just put a little more fabric right here, and not because your body is big or strange. So do you have any advice for people who are just getting started? I think you just did that. Watch Craftsy.
Yeah, I mean, there's Craftsy. I think for me, the biggest thing is that if you can jump to patterns that actually fit you as soon as possible, that will be great. Because although theoretically you can fit any pattern to fit you, some are much harder than others. And I think what people don't really understand fully when they start is that every sewing pattern company has a basic body, which we usually call a block, that we design for. And so it's a combination of a combo of measurements, but also a combo of proportions. So for instance, with Cashmerette, and I'm quite open about this, to be honest, I'm probably more open than other brands, so maybe it's not so obvious with other brands, but for us, it's, obviously curvy, it's big boobs, and not assuming, you have lined back shoulders because you have big boobs, just like you're a normal person, but your boobs have gotten bigger. We're short-waisted, most women are. We have a sway back, most women have one. We have a bit forward shoulders, very, very common. So, and we assume you have a tummy. There's just like a default assumption that everyone has a tummy. So if you have that kind of body, if you start with a Cashmerette pattern, there's a fighting chance you may need to make no alterations, or the very first thing you ever make, you go like, oh my goodness, this fits me better than anything else has ever fitted me, right? Which isn't to say you can't improve it, but you may find that it immediately works for you. Well, the same thing is like, for instance, if you're pear-shaped, sew-aholic patterns, historically, they're not so active anymore, but they still have patterns. Were really great for that. If you're more up and down and have a B cup, there are actually many options for those people. But you can look at that. For instance, closet core.
Right.
Case,
and grain line, I think, are good for that.
Recently extended into a whole plus size range, and they actually altered the body quite significantly for that. So for instance, they went much more pear-shaped, a bigger waist and bigger boobs. So again, it's like, if you can, I think as a beginner, if you can find a pattern company that makes something for your body type, then you're really one step ahead. Like, I would highly recommend doing that. And then, it's a matter of building skills. So typically someone will make like a woven, which means not stretchy, top or a skirt, or maybe make a t-shirt. People argue about whether sewing with stretchy stuff is easier or harder. I mean, you tend to think whatever you started with is the easier thing to do. And for some people, they start with knits. But I think really that's the key. If you are curvy, there's lots of information. On Cashmerette, we actually have a roundup of plus size pattern companies, not just us, so that people can see lots of different options. And actually, it's funny, if you're not, I guess I'm so in the plus size community that I know exactly where to find all of those, but maybe I don't know where to find the straight sizes. I'm sure you can find them.
It's so funny. I'm so used to reading blogs, and when I look at magazines or catalogs and everyone is so skinny and their clothes don't fit, I'm just like, oh my gosh, these people are so weird looking. They're not normal at all. It looks like we have to do a quick, oh, we're good. Okay. We're doing a quick battery change here.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I have exactly the same thing. Like, I've been looking at pictures of plus size women for many, many years now. And, we'll get on to talking about this, but we're expanding down into straight sizes.
Right.
I get very confused. I look at the pattern pieces and I'm like, really? Is that what it looks like? Because I'm just so used to seeing, size 18 or size 28 pattern pieces. It's very, very different from me. But ultimately, we all have to figure it out. And we can make things fit any size. So that's the big benefit of sewing.
Yeah. So tell me about your expansion to smaller sizes. I love how you say even small women have big boobs.
Yeah. Well, so it's an interesting one, and it has not been without controversy, which I will fully acknowledge. And it was, it took us years to decide to do it. So when I first launched, there were very, very few pattern brands that went into plus sizes. I mean, truly like one or two. And over the years, what's really great, and I think partly, because of the Curvy Sewing Collective and Cashmerette, there are now loads, absolutely tons. A lot of the major brands have extended into plus sizes. And in fact, I'd say probably now, maybe even the majority of them at this point. So that's been great. And it means that, if you're a size 28, you now have, dozens of options, whereas once you might have had like a single option. So we expand up to a 32, and we are continuing to do that. We have most of our patterns now, but we're still working on it. And we really wanted to make sure, that we have met like the majority of plus size people's needs. And then we were like, well, where do we go from here? Because we need to expand. It's, people who run sewing pattern companies are not millionaires. It's really hard to make money from doing it. So we were looking at, what our next step should be. And to be perfectly honest, since the day we launched, we had people asking us to go smaller, especially a lot of people in 8 and a 10, because 8 and 10s are like a very common size to be. I think, like 8 to 14 is like a very large chunk of the population in sewing pattern sizes. And so we had loads of people asking us. And the more we looked at it, we were like, okay, in the last 5 years, there's been exponential growth in the number of plus size available patterns. But almost nobody has done big boobs, small people sizes. The only one I can think of that comes to mind is Gertie. So Gertie's charm patterns are available in A to H all the way down to, I think, 4 or 4. But apart from that, there's almost nothing, which means that if you're a size 8 and, you have an F cup, you have to do an FBA every single time. So, I want to acknowledge it's a lot easier if you're a size 8 and you have an F cup than it is if you're a size 32, right? And that's why we didn't do this from the very beginning. And I don't think it's, these sewists aren't in exactly the same situation, but they are in the same situation that nothing fits them and that they have to do FBAs the entire time. So that's why we decided to bring it down. And when we did announce, we had like an amazing response, because I think if you don't have really big boobs, you might be like, why do you care? Like, why would you bother doing this? But, if you're a size, 8 and you have a G cup, trying to find like a fitted bodice that fits you straight out of the packet, I mean, it's impossible, right? Or a button-down shirt that doesn't gape, or a wrap dress that doesn't gape. So that's basically why we decided to do it. Now, all of that said, we will remain a plus size brand at our heart. Like, that's really important. I think partly, I own the company, so I don't see it changing. But also because plus size women are very rarely centered, right? Like a lot of brands that have the full range of sizes now, like straight sizes that have gone up, they're often using like a size 16 to demonstrate their plus size. And it's like, it's not great, for your size 26 members, that they never see anyone who looks like them. Or you don't see customers being like really promoted who are in the bigger sizes. So even when we do go down to the 0, we will remain plus size centered. And there's lots of meanings to that. Like, for instance, like we're maintaining our Facebook community as plus size, and we've opened another one for all sizes. And we'll also have the option on Instagram to only see plus sizes, not only to see straight sizes. So it's a little asymmetrical. And the reason is because you see straight size people always, everywhere, constantly. So I honestly think that it does everyone good to see plus sizes. But
so when you first launched, I loved how you said, I'll include instructions for a small bust adjustment if you have to do that. And I was like, yes. Because I'm so used to having to do a full bust adjustment.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And sometimes people do say like, well, why don't you have an A cup? And it's like, well, there's lots of people catering to A and B cups, and there's very few, or there have been very few people catering to bigger sizes. So yeah, so that's kind of why we're doing it, and that's how we're handling it.
All right. And I also love your new pattern sizing calculator. I put my measurements in and got my 3 sizes. I'm 14 on the top, 16 waist, and a 12 hip. So, and I love how you have the link to how to grade and everything. Have you had really good response to your calculator?
We have, yeah. We get pinged an email every time someone uses it, and it's like bing, 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 bing.
Oh, nice.
So so I decided to do it because by far the #1 question that people ask us is, what size am I? And I think it's partly our cup sizing. We have introduced high bust, which I think makes it a lot easier to choose a cup size. But there are still lots of people who aren't sure. And also a lot of people are not familiar at all with grading between sizes, which means when you make, different sizes at different points of view, like you just said you do, Kate, and which, by the way, 80% of women grade between sizes based on our survey. So incredible. People are like, oh, I must have a weird body. It's like, no, literally 80% of people do it. Like, it's very standard. So we wanted a way that we could not get hundreds of emails every day of people asking what size they are, but also make it easy for people to understand. So it was a lot of work, especially like I did it when my child wasn't really sleeping through the night. I'd be there going like, how does this work? Yeah. But we basically programmed it. It'll work for straight sizes when we launch those too. And what it tells you is it tells you what size to make at the waist, hip, and bust. It also tells you if you have to do a full bust adjustment, and if so, by how much, or a small bust adjustment, and by how much, and shows you grading between sizes. If you are currently below or above our size range, it will tell you that, and it will ask you to email us. Sometimes it might be, for instance, if your hip is like 1 inch larger than our range, so if you have like a 63-inch hip, it'll tell you, contact us. Now, in that case, you can actually fit in almost all our patterns because there's ease at the hip. So for instance, all of our all of our dresses, if you have a 63-inch hip, you could wear the 32 and it would be fine. But the size calculator can't quite do that nuance. So if you do get the answer, like, contact us, please do contact us, because it may well be that the answer is, if you're smaller, just wait, and we're going smaller soon. Or if you're a bit bigger, we may be able to tell you, you know what, you can actually fit in like 90% of our patterns, and let us show you which ones. So we're always available to help people with that.
Okay, great. So how do you decide what to design next?
It's a hard one. I think of myself as like deeply unfashionable. So I always have these like crises where I'm like, I'm meant to be a fashion designer, but I'm not very fashionable. So it's basically a variety of things. One, what do women with big boobs want to wear that they currently can't wear because it's difficult? So, you know, it's led to like our button-down shirts, our shirt dresses, the Ipswich swimsuit that has an underwire in it, you know, because I was really thinking like, what are the things I wish I'd had, you know, I wish I'd had access to that I can't. So that's like a big driver, like thinking about that. Then there's really looking at like, what do people wear every day? Because here's the thing, we are not high fashion, right? We're just not. We're not going to make something that you're going to wear once to a gala, or it's going to get you into like the in style on the street, like, you know, like Candid. Sorry. I mean, maybe if you put a very exciting hat on, you might, but probably not. But what we want to do is wear the clothes that people actually wear on a daily basis. And the reason for that is because if you're plus size and have big boobs, it's really hard to find clothes. So it's nice to make an occasional fancy dress. And we have fancy dresses, right? We have the Upton and dresses like that. But more so like you just want to make Concord t-shirts and Fuller cardigans and Ames jeans. So we do that a lot, thinking about what people really want. We certainly do look at trends. Like, we're not like totally inured to fashion. So you know, the colder pants are sort of like this loose, big loose elastic back pants is like a very sort of like on trend thing and has been for a little while now. It's really sort of a blend of all those things. In all honesty, we have way more ideas than we have like size of team and money to do. So I can easily launch like 30 patterns a year, no problem, if I had a team of like 50 people, right? Like, I have ideas like, whoo, out the window. But we do not have the time. So, you know, the one that a lot of people ask for and we've been working on now and going through many rounds of is a blazer. And there's also this sort of element of balancing what takes a lot of time to develop and balancing what's easy, and also with the sales. And this is sort of an interesting one. I know sometimes in sewing forums, there's a lot of chat about like, why are all the indies doing basics, right? Why do they all do basics? It must just be because they don't have to draft things and, you know, they just want to do simple things. Well, the answer is because they sell way more. That is why. Sometimes they're easier to develop, and honestly, sometimes they're not. I'll tell you right now, our straight size Montrose just went through the 3rd round of paid testing. So I'm paying every single time, every single person. Wow. It's already on its 3rd round. So it's not automatically easy when something's simple. But I'll tell you what's really hard to deal with. And, you know, we've been here several times. You decide to do something more complex. It takes you like 2 years to develop. You go through rounds of testing. It's really difficult. You have to print many more pages. So it costs you a lot more money to produce. And then it sells a tiny fraction of your t-shirt. And so it is important for us to have, you know, a portfolio of from beginner to advanced patterns, lots of different styles, and to meet different needs, for instance, like having the blazer. But the reality is we do have to balance between things we know that are going to sell really well and keep the company going with sort of like more interesting things that are very expensive but tend not to sell so well. So we'll see what happens with the blazer. I will say my theory may fall down on the blazer because it has been one of our biggest requests for years now. And I resisted doing it for a long time because it's hard, which I tend to resist. But so many people have asked for it. I'm kind of hoping maybe it sells well. I would like to. I can tell you at the very least that having to make an entire blazer every time you do a muslin is really painful.
But I bet it's getting easier. So what is on the horizon for Cashmerette? I mean, I know you're expanding to smaller sizes. You have your blazer coming up. And we haven't mentioned that you are a little bit limited by living in England right now.
I am, yes. So I'm a single mom of a toddler, and the first couple of months of COVID, we were literally in a 5th floor city center apartment, the two of us, with no daycare.
Oh, man.
I worked for the 2 hours that she slept. So eventually I decided to come back to the UK where my parents live so that I would get a bit of support. So we're here now living in a tiny village in very, very bucolic countryside, I have to say. You can't criticize the countryside here. It's very nice. Criticize the weather. Yeah, a bit. Not great. Many things to do. But, my parents are helping out. So I'm able to work a bit more, still part-time. It is difficult remotely. With some of our samples, we have to send them to and from the Atlantic for me to try things on and check them out. I'm currently hiring, and I have to do that all via Zoom. So I'm doubling my team without having ever met the people. But, these are just the times we live in. And to be perfectly honest, I feel very, very grateful that we have the technology that I can do this, and also that I have the kind of job where I can move across the Atlantic because it suits me, because I probably couldn't do that in a corporate job.
Right. And I have hired some people on Zoom in the last few months, and it really went pretty well.
Yeah.
Rachel is saying,
Definitely.
yep, it went well.
Yeah, so coming up, so we have the blazer. That's the really big thing that we're working on right now. We do actually have a patent, hopefully, coming out in about 6 weeks. Our printer has had a major issue and has stopped printing for 3 weeks now. So we're going to have to see how that goes. But we have the blazer coming out. We have 3 patterns, exclusive, coming out in the straight sizes at the same time in early next year. Can't give you an exact date yet, but then. And then we're working on 2 more big new patterns next year that will come in our whole size range. So they'll be the first ones that come in 0 to 32. The blazer is going to be plus size only for now. We're also looking at the possibility of thinking about online events. That's another big thing that we're working on. I did some webinars earlier in the pandemic times, which are on YouTube, and they did really, really well, and people really love being connected. It wasn't possible for me when I initially came here because I had a dodgy internet connection, and also just very hard with the timings. But we're looking at doing some more things like that because obviously we can't do things like workshops right now. So there's a lot of things going on at the same time. I'm also working on a super secret project, which comes out next year, but I can't tell you about that. But it takes up a huge amount of my time.
I know. I wasn't in corporate world, but I was in the healthcare world before I opened the fabric store. And I found that I have built a system that is just as complex as my past job. And it's amazing how you do that to yourself by choice.
It's good. I love it though. I mean, it suits me so well being an entrepreneur, both in terms of my life with my daughter and just my personality type and so on. I like being in charge of things. I like coming up with new ideas. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't, I wouldn't trade it in for my old corporate life, although, the money was nice. But apart from that, my life is much better now.
Yes, but the money will come for both of us. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jenny?
I mean, it's a funny time, right? It's a funny time in America. I mean, in the UK, everyone's feeling it too, I have to say. And, between the pandemic and politics and everything that's been going on the sort of racial justice side, it's the sort of uncommonly stressful time. And I'm certainly someone who is insulated from many of those things, right? I have a lot of privilege. They don't impact on me terribly much, but they impact on lots of people I love and lots of people I know and communities I care about, even if I'm not in them. And I have to say that I feel like it's really sort of shown the strength of the sewing community, but it's also really sort of emphasized what a great thing sewing is. I know that at the beginning of COVID, our sales went straight up. And I know from other friends who own patent companies that exactly the same thing happened to them too, because a lot of people are stuck at home and, it was always running around doing things. You never had any time. And obviously, if you don't have childcare, you don't have very much time during the day, probably less than you used to have. But for many people, it's well, I used to go out for dinner and stuff, and now I'm in my house. What shall I do? And so I think it's actually been a great opportunity for a lot of people to reconnect with sewing. And there's also been a lot of people sewing masks who get into it and they're like, well, maybe I could do something other than sewing masks. So I think in a sort of funny way, it'd be wrong to say it's been a good time for sewing, but I think it's sort of like reconnected a lot of people. And I think, you know, I try and find upsides to, you know, like this strange period of my life where I'm not living in my own house and, you know, thousands of miles away from all my friends. And I think that that's one of them, you know, like having that time at home and being able to sort of reconnect with something that, you know, for me anyway, you know, you make something your job, it does change the nature of it a little bit.
Right.
It's been quite a nice opportunity to sort of like go back to what I did originally, which is get excited about sewing and like make things for myself, because suddenly I have more time, at least in the evenings.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I've started making things on YouTube, not YouTube Live, but Facebook Live, including your jeans and your bathing suit. And I have loved being able to make stuff for myself again, because as you said, when you make it your job, you don't have as much time to do your hobby.
Yes, there was a great meme that went around at one point, and I should try and memorize it because it was good. But it was sort of like, you know, if you have a hobby you enjoy, make it your job so you never enjoy it anymore.
Right.
There's something to that.
I still love it, but
cool.
I don't have as much time for it.
Yeah, it has a different feeling.
So segueing from how great the sewing community is, for our 5th anniversary, we did this interview, and on Saturday, we're going to have a big long day of service. At the beginning of the day, I'm going to interview Becky from our local YWCA to talk about the services that they provide to the community to help lift people out of poverty. And then at noon, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a drawstring bag that we can donate to our local Y. And at 3, I'll demo how to make a simple pillowcase that we can also donate. Oh yeah. So don't forget to like this video and comment on it, and like our 3 videos on Saturday and comment on them, and you'll be entered to win a drawing. We have a garment-centered drawing, or a garment-centered prize, and a quilting-centered prize. Our garment-centered prize includes the Palmer Pletch Complete Guide to Fitting that Jenny talked about. And then our second prize is a $20 gift card to the Confidence Stitch. So thanks, Jenny. I've just been such a fan for so long, and it was a thrill to talk to you. And I look forward to working with you in the future. We'll be providing the fabric for one of your new smaller size expansions. So I'm excited to do that together at the beginning of next year.
Yes. Thank you so much. You've been, Confidence Stitch keeps on coming up again and again as like a big supporter of Cashmerette. So I really appreciate it, because it makes a huge difference if people can kind of explain in stores about what it means, you know, and sort of advocate for us. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
I find myself saying a lot like, oh, sorry, I have the perfect pattern for what you want to make, but it's Cashmerette and you're not quite the right size. You're not quite big enough. Yeah. And I think people will be thrilled that they'll be able to buy your patterns regardless of what size they are.
I hope so.
They will. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Bye, Jenny.